in brightest day, in blackest night. No evil shall escape my sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power. Green Lantern's light. Yes, today for Epic Comic Book Wednesday, we'll be talking about Green Lantern, the Silver Age Green Lantern, the cool Green Lantern. Welcome, my friends, welcome to stately Vaughn Manor. And it's Epic Comic Book Wednesday. Every Wednesday, I'll talk about a comic book graphic novel or comic book subject. Steve Donoghue, on his channel, will talk about that same comic book graphic novel or comic book subject. It is our world's finest team-up that we do once a week. So welcome, my friends, welcome once again to the very warm, stately Vaughn Manor. It's 90 degrees right now, I think. And here I am, dressed like this. Standards. You've got to have standards. They must be maintained. So, of course, today we are talking about the Silver Age Green Lantern. Now, Green Lantern was a Golden Age character, but after the successful revamp of The Flash, DC Comics decided to bring back Green Lantern and revamp this character as well. And so they got John Broome and Gil Kane to do this job, to create the new Green Lantern. Hal Jordan, the fearless Hal Jordan test pilot, who was chosen by the Ring of Power. Well, not J.R.R. Tolkien's Ring of Power, but the Green Lantern's ring, power ring, his power ring. He was chosen by the Power Ring to be the new Green Lantern because he's all fearless and stuff. So, the Silver Age Green Lantern is my favorite Green Lantern. I really love the Silver Age Green Lantern. I love the Silver Age for DC Comics. There's just something really cool about them, and very often they had a very cheesy science fiction feel to them, and that's definitely true with Green Lantern. John Broome was a science fiction writer who did these Green Lantern comics, and they all have a real science fiction feel to them. They're basically science fiction superhero stories, which is always extra cool. And in the Silver Age Green Lantern, we have Gil Kane, one of the greatest comic book artists of all time, Gil Kane, who had a tremendous style, just full of energy, his style. A brilliant artist who drew everything. I think he drew every single superhero comic that ever existed. He even drew Blue Devil once. I mean, he drew everything. And he usually did a pretty darn good job. Usually. I mean, there were a couple times he was asleep at the switch, but man, when you draw as much as this guy did, you can't hit it out of the park every time. But most of the time, his artwork was pretty great. And so it's fun to read these old Silver Age comics because you get to see the evolution of his art style. It's very different in the first few issues. Actually, it's very different for a while in the Green Lantern comic book. He probably didn't really cut loose until the very end of the Silver Age Green Lantern stuff. And then, even then, he didn't really cut loose until he got to Marvel, probably. After the Silver Age stuff is when he really just developed the style that when you see a Gil Kane comic book, instantly you know who drew this comic. There's just no doubt. He did some great covers and some brilliant comic book work. So it's fun to read these old Green Lantern comics. And he is, one of the things he's chiefly known for, in fact, is the Silver Age Green Lantern. He drew the whole run of the Silver Age Green Lantern, which is kind of impressive. So I have the Silver Age Green Lantern in a couple omnibus volumes. This is the first volume. It is ginormous. It's very large. Good thing I'm so darn strong. And this is the second volume. So if you're interested in the Silver Age Green Lantern, and you ought to be, you can get it in these two massive volumes. and then you get to exercise your biceps and your shoulder muscles as you read. So that's an added bonus. Unless you have your own power ring, and then you could just lift it with your ring's power. Because I don't think there's any yellow on these things, right? So we should be all right. So yeah, the entirety of the Silver Age run is included in those 2 omnibus volumes. DC did publish a couple Silver Age Green Lantern paperbacks, but because DC Comics reprint program is completely ass, they probably didn't. I don't think they republished all of this stuff in paperbacks. I could be wrong, but I don't think they have. They should have. This should have been done by now, guys. But at least we've got these gigantic omnibus volumes, which I like anyway. I like the gigantic omnibus volumes. So he made his first appearance, Green Lantern, the Silver Age Green Lantern, in Showcase Presents, which is the same comic book that The Flash first showed up in before he got his own comic book. In October 1959, this is Showcase Presents 22, where the Green Lantern, Gil Kane's Green Lantern, and look at that great cover, man. It started off awesome, because look at him floating over the city, floating over Coast City there, trying to stop that missile, which I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, is yellow, because my color vision sucks, and so I can't really tell, but I'm pretty sure it is. And so he's going to have troubles, because his power ring could do like anything he thought of, basically. It's the most powerful superhero weapon in the world, but it doesn't work against yellow. It has an impurity. So anything yellow, it doesn't work against. Now, does this include different shades of yellow? Not in comic books, because I think they only had one shade back then, but it makes you wonder, you know, how yellow do you have to be to not work? Can it just be kind of yellow? I don't know. These are mysteries, superhero mysteries. Let's not think about it too hard. But this had a great first issue where the Green Lantern of the sector, the Green Lanterns are space policemen, basically. They're space policemen who fly around with their power rings that can do just about anything, and they fight evil, which is always cool. And so we've got Abin Sur. Abin Sur is this bald fellow there. Abin Sur has crashed his spaceship because it's the 1950s, and aliens were always crashing. They were always crashing in their spaceships. I don't know if there was just something going on with spaceships at the time. I don't know. I don't know what it was, but they were always crashing, usually on Earth. And unfortunately, he didn't think to use his power ring to cushion his landing or something. There was a reason that he crashed. There was an official reason why, but I can't remember what it was. Yeah, but he has this battery of power, and his ring flies off to find a replacement because he knows he's going to die, this guy. And it finds Hal Jordan, who is in a fake plane. He's a test pilot, and this is a test plane, a simulation plane. And the ring comes and gets him, and he meets the alien, and the alien tells him who he is, says, "Hey, man, I'm Abin Sur. I'm a Green Lantern of this sector, and I'm about to die, and we need a Green Lantern in the sector, and you're the bravest guy around, so here's the ring. You're the superhero now. Sorry, that's what you're doing. You're a Green Lantern now of Earth." And he said, okay, cool. And so he became Green Lantern of Earth. And he started experimenting with his power ring, you know, lifting stuff around. And he's like, man, I must use it only in the greatest secrecy. I know, I'll adopt a secret identity. I'll call myself Green Lantern after the power battery. Because, like, at the time, you know, he didn't know that they were all called Green Lanterns. And they were. What luck, he just came up with that name. So, and then he continued to have little adventures. And in the early Silver Age issues, every comic book had a few different adventures. He falls in love with his boss, Carol, who eventually becomes a superhero sort of Starfire. She becomes Starfire. It's awesome. It happens later. And yeah, so basically we have a series of great superhero adventures that are also science fiction adventures, because like I said, John Broome was way into science fiction, and this is a very science fiction character. And so this comic book, back in the Silver Age, it was one science fiction adventure after another. He was always fighting monsters. You know, he's always having trouble with the rings of impurities. Eventually, he met other Green Lanterns, and he realized his place in the Green Lantern Corps. And Sinestro, who used to be a Green Lantern, who turned evil, shows up, you know. Sinestro, we get a lot of him. And I need to talk about Thomas. We need to talk about Thomas. Kalmaku, Thomas Kalmaku, who is here. This is Thomas here. Now, Thomas is the Green Lantern's best friend in the whole world. And Thomas, he's kind of like a silent partner to Green Lantern. He's the only guy, Thomas is, who knows who Green Lantern is. And he's actually writing, he's chronicling the adventures of Green Lantern for Hal Jordan, who apparently, you know, he couldn't write that well. He just didn't have time. So Thomas is writing the adventures of Green Lantern. And Thomas is like, he's the mechanic at the place, whose name I'm suddenly blanking on. But he's the mechanic. He's Hal Jordan's test pilot mechanic. He's the mechanic. And he's super smart. And he's always getting Hal Jordan out of trouble. Well, sometimes Hal Jordan's rescuing Thomas, but a lot of times Thomas is rescuing Hal Jordan. It's a whole thing that they've got going on. The unfortunate part is that Thomas in the comic book has a nickname. And because he's Thomas Kalmaku, his nickname is Pie Face. Pie Face, which is, you know, racist as hell. But somehow nobody back then realized it. It was a weird time, man. This was 1959 and 1960. And it was really like that back then. Like, none of the white people who were making these comic books realized that that was offensive. But this is the same era that Have Gun Will Travel, that Western TV show, was on with Paladin, who was the chief hero of the show. He was a gunfighter who traveled around. But the only other recurring character on Have Gun Will Travel was a Chinese man, and his name was Hey Boy. Hey Boy, that was his name. This is that era where stuff like that, I mean, nobody, I guess, even thought twice about that horrible racist name. Now, eventually, on Have Gun Will Travel, Hey Boy left and was replaced by Hey Girl. I wish I was making that up, but I'm not. Hey Girl. Yeah, so that really was a thing. So Pie Face, yeah, so Thomas was called that through the entire Silver Age run, right up until the end. Which, you know, caused problems later on in the comic as everybody suddenly realized, oh, that's offensive. Fortunately, as a character, he was not. I mean, if it wasn't for his name, this character would be pretty progressive, actually, because he was super smart, really competent, a great guy, an excellent partner. He was just awesome. Like I said, very often he would get Hal Jordan out of trouble. So he was a great character with this awful offensive name. So there is that. Know that going in when you read this stuff. There is that. But overall, if you can overlook that nonsense, it was just Silver Age magic, this book. Now, some of the plots were nonsensical. This is true. You know how it is. It's a Silver Age comic book. And it had its share of nonsensical plots. Now, the cool thing is that they did have this cool story where the original Green Lantern comes back and hangs out with the new Green Lantern. I mean, that was really cool that they did that. They did stuff like that in the Silver Age, you know. And it was fun watching Gil Kane's artwork just get better and better as the series went along. And right here, you're starting to see how dynamic his work was getting with with the fight scene with Green Lantern. It just, yeah, that's starting to look more Gil Kane-y, more of the Gil Kane that we are familiar with. That's a great cover there. That one's pretty good. Eventually, towards the end of the Silver Age, it kind of lost it a little bit. They decided to go in a couple new directions. Hal Jordan quit his job as a test pilot, became a salesman, and it was lame. He really just they should have not changed anything. I'm very Steve Donoghue when it comes to Green Lantern. They shouldn't have changed anything. They should have kept it just the way it was, with Green Lantern having one fantastic adventure after another. I'm totally right with Steve Donoghue on this particular Silver Age character. Although I don't know what he thinks of Green Lantern. He might not like Green Lantern. I don't know. We'll see. Steve Donoghue's always surprising me. You know, he'll probably talk about how all the logical inconsistencies in Green Lantern comics. This is the guy who reads Superboy. Anyway, eventually sales were not particularly great on Green Lantern after a while because, oh, who knows? Everybody's reading Marvel comics at that point. Who knows why? And so they did make a change after the Silver Age. And it was this. This came next. Green Lantern partners up with Green Arrow in a comic full of real world stuff where Hal Jordan is like this super conservative guy and Green Arrow is a super liberal dude, and they're always going at it in these stories. And, you know, these are classics. Neil Adams, Denny O'Neil, they are classics. They are. And they were excellent stories, which took over for Green Lantern, and I wish they didn't exist. I wish the Silver Age Green Lantern just lasted forever. That's me. I wish that it had. But, you know, these are pretty damn good. Even I have to admit that, even though they're very, very, very dated and seem very preachy now. I mean, they're very much of their time, these stories. And I would have preferred if just, you know, the Silver Age had just gone on, only, you know, call Thomas Thomas and everything would be good. Green Lantern, over the years, has been a very abused character by DC Comics. He's one of the most abused characters. Poor Hal Jordan. They eventually made him a psychopath who killed all the other Green Lantern Corps. And later they had to retcon that, but only after he became the Phantom or something. No. Did he? Yeah, something. He became... Who did he become? I'm blanking out. It wasn't the Phantom. The Spectre. He became the Spectre. You know, I get them confused. It's 95 degrees in here, and I'm in a wool cap. So, you know, don't expect me to think too clearly. But yeah, Hal Jordan has been very abused over the years. And he's been replaced by multiple other Green Lanterns. Some of them are cool, like John Stewart. Some of them are lame. But yeah, eventually Hal Jordan came back because, of course, he had to. And all of his crimes were chalked up to some villain taking over his brain. But really, even the stuff that I probably should like of the newer Green Lantern stuff, I've never liked it. It doesn't even come close to me, to this Silver Age stuff. So Silver Age Green Lantern. It was the best, and this is one of my favorite comic books. It's awesome. Okay. That's all I have to say about it. Check out Steve Donoghue later on. Who knows what he's going to say? He's so unpredictable and wild, that guy. You got to check out his video. Okay, guys, I will catch you next time.